I just can't bring myself to say it loud. Afraid that what I'll say comes out somehow of right. That is when it seems we move in circles day to day, twist the drama of the play to get us by. And it feels like fear, like I'll disappear. It's so hard to steer, yet I go on. Do we need debates when it seems too late? Like I bleed, but wait, like nothing's wrong. You lift my spirit, take me higher, make me fly. Touch the moon up in the sky when you are mine. You lift me higher, take my spirit, make it fly. Where only wonders will appear. Like the other day, I thought you won't be coming back. I came to realize my lack, lost the dreams, and among the schemes and all the tricks we try to play, only dreams will hold their sway and defy. When it feels like fear, like I'll disappear, it's so hard to steer, yet I go on. So do we need debates when it seems too late? Like I'll lead, but wait, like nothing's wrong. You lift my spirit, take me higher, make me fly. Touch the moon up in the sky when you are mine. You lift me higher, take my spirit, make it fly. Where only wonders will appear. You lift my spirit, take me higher, make me fly. Touch the moon up in the sky when you are mine. You lift me higher, take my spirit, make it fly. Where only wonders will appear.
Hi everybody, it's 314 React here. Today we are continuing our journey through the 3D Mark collection, and today we have reached 3D Mark 2005. 2005. So it installs pretty simply. The one thing I have found is that in order to display text properly, it needs the high DPI settings set to override and system enhanced, as well as disable full screen optimizations and running compatibility mode for Windows Vista. Just make sure that, like I said, it displays the text correctly, but also in 4K displays the 3D rendering properly as well. So now we can boot up 3DMark. I only had one error where it complained about my CPU couldn't run MMX instructions or something like that, but then that error seemed to just disappear and I never got it again. So I can't even find a Vogons thread on this dedicated to 3DMark 2005 as far as I found. So I think this is a lot easier one to install. Here we are. We open up to the tip of the day. You can click through these and get some nice little bits of advice from the FutureMark team here, which is pretty cool. I don't remember this being on 3DMark 2003. There's a little bit of information here about the Pro and Business versions and how it requires DirectX 9C. And of course, in regards to the Pro version, this is again another 3DMark Classic, which is available on ul.com legacy benchmarks. There'll be a link in the description to download that and grab the key, which will allow you to unlock the full version. And here we are with a slight description of the benchmark itself. It has support for DirectX 9C, which is greatly enhanced from 3DMark 2003, up to 2 million polygons on screen, and game tests including Return to Procyon, Firefly, Forest, and Canyon Flight. During the filming of my previous video on 3DMark 2003, there'll be a link to that appearing on screen now. I realized that the way they were using pixel shaders was a little bit weird in that you could set the difference between pixel shader 1.4 to 2 and it wouldn't really make much of a difference. And yeah, it was a bit strange in that they weren't really utilizing pixel shader 2, it seems. So there was a bit of a controversy around that. Again, there'll be links to more information about that in the description. I've read a little bit about 3DMark 2005. This one looks like it actually does use a bit more advanced technology. So hopefully we'll be able to flick between pixel shader 2 and 3 and see if we can see some differences between the two. I imagine the pixel shader will be the one with the most differences. Again, because we have the Pro version unlocked, we can use the image quality module to generate images with different settings and have a look between them so we can do some comparison. So if we look at the game tests here, as mentioned, we have Return to Procyon, Firefly, Forest, Canyon Flight. We have the CPU tests 1 and 2. We have fill rate feature tests, pixel shader feature tests, vertex shader feature tests, and batch size tests with a whole ton of triangles, which should be really interesting to run. The whole thing runs in about 10 minutes and 2 seconds, and the demo, I believe, runs in about 16 minutes, as you should have just seen. So I'm going to do the same thing I usually do, which is we go through, have a look at the settings, and then we're going to look through the benchmark and do some commentary over that. And then I'm going to run the demo again and then do some further commentary over that, as well as look at any other additions to this application. So let's have a look at the settings. So we've got a standard garden variety resolution here, which we're going to set to 4K, which seems to work just flawlessly. We're also going to set anti-aliasing to 8 times, and we're going to set texture filter to anisotropic, and we're going to put that to 16. We've got the VS profile at 3, that's the vertex shader profile at 3.0, pixel shader profile at 3.0, because this is DirectX 9C, so it's got shader model 3, support, and force full precision and color mipmaps here. Disable DST, I'm going to have a look into what that means. Disable post-processing, pretty much self-explanatory, we're not going to worry about that. And forcing software vertex shaders generally doesn't make any difference to the look as far as I've seen in 2003, but will probably just reduce the frame rate. So we're not going to worry about these two, but we're going to look into this one, and this one. And the first one we're going to look into is force full precision, and we're going to look at the 3DMark 2005 white paper. We have force full precision, which enables to go from partial precision 16-bit to full, at least 24-bit floating point precision in the shader calculations. And by default, partial precision is used, and it's used where it doesn't decrease the rendering quality. So setting this forces the precision to be used in all shader calculations. So there must be some shader calculations that are improved by this. I imagine at the time there weren't a lot of graphics cards that would support full precision, but I believe now they do. So this should provide probably a little bit of improved visual quality in some areas. So we'll leave that on for now. And then we have disable DST, which allows you to disable depth central texture usage in dynamic shadow rendering. It's an additional hardware feature used to optimize dynamic shadow rendering. The setting is for professional reviewers who may want an identical rendering comparison for some hardware reviews. There's some more information about that earlier on in the paper, so let's find that. This white paper is an absolute gold mine. I've actually got it printed out here next to me so I can hopefully reference it while we're going through some of the tests. But yeah, it goes into so much detail about these things. So we've got dynamic shadow rendering rendering. So you've got percentage closest filtering, which is another way of processing shadows or depth maps to render the shadows. And then you also have DST. And the point they're making here about being able to disable it is that you could argue that DST and hardware accelerated PCF versus non-DST and point sampling code do not produce comparable performance measurements, and the resulting rendering shows slight differences. So there's an option to switch it off if the benchmark user wishes to compare exactly identical rendering performance across different architectures. So yeah, there's a lot of detail there. We're not going to go too far into it. It's something I'd need to really read to get my head around, but it is fascinating. These different ways of doing shadows. Again, there'll be a link to this white paper in the description, so you can go there and read about it. And of course you have disable post-processing, which just disables full frame filtering in all game tests. So it gets rid of bloom and a few other things that were quite common in the mid-2000s. So it'll be a good way to just sort of see how it affects the performance and turn off some of the probably excessive bloom that was present back then, but we're going to leave that on. Color mipmaps is an interesting one. It's where it colors mipmaps in the distance, red, green, and blue. So it allows you to see where mipmaps are being implemented, which is an interesting thing, not only visually, but also you can see where mipmaps are actually kicking in across the environment. So we may take a look at that. Those are the options. So let's head back to 3DMark. So what I found is I'm occasionally getting this weird error here, and I've no idea what's really causing it, but what I found is bizarrely switching between compatibility on and off while ensuring that the DPI settings are still there will sort of fix it sometimes. It was running before just fine with Windows Vista compatibility, but now it isn't. So I've now reset the compatibility and reloaded it, turned the compatibility mode completely off. So when I said it was easy to install earlier, that's because I'd run it a few times before starting the video, but of course as soon as I start recording the video, loads of problems begin. So let's see if it does it this time. Nope, it's erroring again. I have no idea what's causing this error. Okay, right, we now have it working. Don't really know what I set there, but whatever. Let's just run it and hope that it keeps running as we go forward. So here we are on Return to Procyon, running at 150 to 200 frames a second. The 8 times anti-aliasing running in 4K makes this look really quite smooth. This is where you're starting to see a lot of physics effects. Like all the particles and stuff there, which look very, very cool. I'm just having a look now to see if 3DMark2005 supported PhysX, and I don't think it did, because I think that was just before PhysX came in. I think PhysX came in around 2006 with their PhysX hardware dedicated card for, of course, calculating physics. So all these particles are probably being done on the CPU, but they are still very impressive. So the fact they bounce around so much and they stay on the screen for a long time, all the boxes moving. Oh, those old school shadows are so brilliant. And here we go to the Firefly, which again shows off some really nice shadowing. This still looks pretty good even now. Bearing in mind this is coming up to 20 years old. So it's quite impressive. Although it can be a bit difficult to run such old software on modern systems, it can still look quite impressive. This was kind of the turning point, I think, as soon as you start to get to DirectX 9C, where, yeah, things started evolving quite a considerable amount, and we started to head much more on the path away from cartoony sort of graphics to photorealism. I mean, look at that. That looks really nice. A lot of polygons there. And here we go, the flying ship one. I remember back in the day running this on my, I tried running it on my FX 5500 at first, and it probably ran single digits, and yeah, it was not pretty. But then my 7900 GT that I got in 2006 would run it reasonably well. Although it was still quite laggy. probably not getting above 30 FPS. But again, this still looks, you can tell it's aged. You can tell it's very much the Xbox 360, or just before the Xbox 360 PS3 sort of generation. That sort of look, very bloom. Some of the models are still a bit early 2000s, but there's a whole load of new pixel shading on top of it. And the animations are a bit kind of, you know, goofy and old school. But it's got that kind of new sheen to it, thanks to, of course, the new pixel shaders. Oh, here we go, the CPU tests. Now, the CPU tests always run like trash on these. 1 FPS, which is interesting because I don't think they'd have run 1 FPS back in the day. So I don't know whether that's the way this utilizes modern CPUs, or some sort of incompatibility with modern software or hardware. I don't know. I'm just fairly certain that this CPU test would have run, although maybe not. Maybe it was sub 1 FPS on older CPUs, which I imagine would have been horrendous to sit through, because it would have just taken ages. Because I do wonder if this is just moving the entire rendering pipeline onto the CPU, including all the texture filtering and pixel shaders and all that, which is a hell of a lot of work for the CPU, which should explain the horrendous frame rate. I may have to get an old laptop up and running. I do have a 7950 GT and a Core 2 Duo laptop somewhere that I could run this on, kind of representative of the era, sort of hardware that I could run this on, to see how these CPU tests would run on that, and to see if the floating point precision option would work. I may do a video on that old laptop. My god. So I'm guessing when it says FPS 1 there, that's anywhere from 0 to 1 FPS. So it could be going sub 1 FPS. So I remember running this a lot back in the day, but I just don't remember these CPU tests. It could have been because they're part of the Pro version. So there we have 45,677 3D marks, which is a decent score because the software is a little bit more aligned with the hardware, a little bit more modern. So I think it utilizes the modern hardware a bit more. So that included the CPU tests 1 and 2, but we didn't have the feature tests enabled because I've had to restart 3D Mark so much that I'd lost those. So going to re-enable those, going to rerun. So just on the second run of this, I've actually been looking through the white paper at the same time. They have some information on these tests. They got returned to Procyon. So they're using materials on the spaceship interior, using Blinn Phong reflections. The exponent calculations are implemented using lookups rather than calculating them mathematically. So there's a little bit of optimization there. The lights in the ceiling are approximated with directional light from above, generating dynamic shadows using a 2048 by 2048 resolution depth map. Large number of point lights. Point lights don't add shadows. You save on system load. So there are some optimizations in this. Corridor has point lights throwing shadows using a cube depth map. Firefly Forest has a skybox surrounding the scene. The visibility isn't that far, so most of that is handled by a skybox, again, to get as many polygons on screen as possible with all that shadowing. There's a large number of trees, there's dense vegetation, and the vegetation on the ground is actually one of the key interests in the scene. There's a dynamic lighting and shadowing system. Oh wow, the tree branches are a modified metal material without a specular map, and with a diffused cube map and no bump mapping. And the sky material does a procedural light scattering. So again, there's plenty of optimizations here that they've done, plenty of clever things that they've done, things you wouldn't have to do in modern day with a PBR based system. Of course, we've got a large scale outdoor scene here, depth fog, reflections, refractions on the water, for volumetric fog, and we have the rock surface of the canyon, which is one of the heavy materials, filling up a PS2 shader almost to the last instruction when combined with the dynamic shadow rendering. So this was really pushing Pixel Shader 2 to the limit, but we are running in Pixel Shader 3, so I imagine that's a bit more advanced. Normal maps, Lambertian diffuse shading. The scene is rendered 6 times to get correct reflections and refractions and add shadows to those. The water is further developed with a water shader from 3D Mark 2003, adding multiple reads from a normal map, reflection and refraction maps, plus per pixel Fresnel, with a single directional light source. There's a bit of information about the CPU tests here. There's a good job we've rerun this because we're able to go over it in a bit more detail this time. So the CPU tests test in low resolution using software vertex processing and disable post-processing, increases the graphics card workload and makes the test result reflect above all the CPU's performance, rendering 3D scenes and performing other 3D game related tasks while performing matrix calculations. The CPU test also uses fixed frame rendering to further ensure the workload stays the same for all systems. In 3D Mark 2005, an additional workload is added. The CPU not only calculates the vertex shaders but also continuously calculates the flight path of the airship. So it's fixed frame, which is interesting. It could explain why it always runs at the same sort of frame rate. 2 FPS fixed frame mode. And then there's a whole bunch of extra calculations for the movements run on the CPU as well. And there's options to disable multi-threading, because at the time there would have been some CPUs coming out with multiple cores or threads on them. And there's no AI calculations in CPU test 2. So this one doesn't have any AI calculations. Fascinating stuff. Really, really fascinating. Now we're on to the fill rate. 3DMarks have included fill rate tests ever since 2000. They've been pretty much the same, and the previous ones have been bandwidth limited. 3DMark 2005 did them a bit differently, more theoretical, minimizing the influence of bandwidth and attempting to concentrate on measuring fill rate. Tests do not look as nice as the previous versions. Any nicer effect would require larger texture map and thereby again move the bottleneck towards graphics bandwidth. Single texturing there, multi-texturing, pixel shader test. These tests run really quickly. It's hard to catch up on what one we're actually on at the moment because they load so fast, and I'm trying to look at the paper at the same time. These are really flying through. So the grass one was a vertex shader test, the complicated one, and these are the batch size tests at the moment that we're now running through. And these tests are very simple scene, very much unoptimized, targeting a weak spot in most graphics drivers today, i.e. 2005. That was batches of sending data to the GPU. 6 runs of this test, 128 meshes of 128 by 128 quads are drawn with 832, 128, 512, 248 and 32,768 triangles per batch. So the higher batch size there should be considered an optimized one for most drivers today, but the smaller the batch sizes get, the slower the rendering will be. Basically just testing with the smaller batch sizes. I'm guessing smaller batch sizes, you have to do a number of API calls to send that batch over, which adds in latency, which slows the frame rate down. So the larger the batch sizes, the more information you can send over at once, and the less you have to initialize along the pipeline, so the quicker the GPU can render a whole bunch of stuff without the CPU having to feed it information. So that's a pretty cool test to add in. So if we go through the list of tests here, because some of those ran through really quickly. Feature tests. So you had fill rate single texturing, fill rate multi-texturing, yep. Then you had pixel shader. So that's using game test 3, the rock face, which is fairly bandwidth dependent, because any game like Material with a complex shader will also have a number of lookups to large textures. So that's a fairly simple one, just displaying the rock face. And then the next one was the vertex shader test, which was just to do some simple transformation and single lighting on 6 high polygon sea monster models. So that was relatively simple. Then the next one was the grass one, which is much more complicated. Illuminating and transforming a large number of grass straws. Each straw is skinned and bent separately. The straw waves were calculated using a fractal noise algorithm calculated on the CPU, but highly optimized to decrease the influence of the CPU performance on the measurement. And then then it went on to the batch size tests. So that is really, really cool. Again, gives us a very high number, a bit more scaled to the hardware that we actually have without running into so many limitations and incompatibilities that we've seen before. So let's do a quick look at the color mip maps. And let's do it with turn to Procyon. So here you can see immediately little green bits on the textures there. And further in the distance, blue, red. That's where you can see the mip maps are kicking in. So on the floor there, no mip maps are kicking in just yet, but there are some on the walls and on those bits of geometry in the background. There we go. Now you can see some green floor there, some green, red. So you can actually see the transitions between mip maps as well. And even on the particles there, you can see some mip mapping, which is really interesting. So you can actually see where the mip maps are kicking in and how the mip maps are blending in with each other. It's interesting that a lot of the main floor doesn't have any mip mapping applied to it whatsoever, but there's a lot on the characters and for some reason on the particles and on some of the angles on that ship in the background there. It's interesting. It's really interesting to see where the mip maps are kicking in and how they sort of blend in with each other, and also the sort of weird effect that it gives the graphics. I do wonder if this is a bit glitched because it doesn't look quite right. I don't think this is how mip maps would be being implemented, especially on the particle effects there. I don't know why it'd be applying to that, and the way they're sort of changing at an angle. It almost looks like it's more surface normals rather than anything else it's colouring there. Let's just refer back to the white paper quickly. Checkbox colours mip maps red, green, blue. Basically lower resolution textures that you can filter towards to reduce flickering of sub-pixel texels in the distance. Colouring mip maps produces somewhat distorted rendering, but is useful for inspecting texture filtering quality. The full size textures are not coloured. Yeah, so the full size textures that aren't being mip mapped aren't coloured. So essentially, anything you see that looks like a normal texture with that on isn't a mip map. So I think there may have been some rendering error there. You should have seen some textures in the distance changing colour, but you didn't see a lot of that. It was mainly on the characters and at odd angles. That's very, very odd. So the next thing I want to look into is filtering and AA tests. Go to 4K there and run. Here we go. It's the same one as what we had in 3DMark 2003, where you can dynamically adjust the texture filtering in real time. Here we go, there's the mipmap coloring. So that's what it should look like with mipmap coloring, but it wasn't looking like that in the Procyon rendering that we were looking at, which is odd. But again, that could just be a result of such old software being run on newer hardware and APIs. There you go, magnification filter, linear, point, minification, linear, anisotropic, mipmapping, linear, no mipmapping. And there you go, when you turn mipmap coloring on, you don't see any different colors because there's no mipmapping. So we put mipmapping on, point, linear, and then you can adjust the anisotropy level and the anti-aliasing level. And you can kind of see the differences, even with odd numbers of anisotropy, which is usually not available. You can sort of see where the diminishing returns kick in, and usually why we don't see any more than 16 times anisotropy, because yeah, diminishing returns. There's a whole bunch of extra settings you can adjust here. LOD bias, so you can crank up the smaller mipmaps to be close to the screen. Really interesting. You can also go negative LOD bias, which means you can make the more higher res textures appear further from the screen. You turn on colored mipmapping, there you go. So you can actually see where the mipmaps start to kick in with the LOD bias. Oh, that's so cool. So you can actually, that's really cool. Oh wow, oh that's funky. Whoa, that's 2001: A Space Odyssey. That's so fascinating though, because yeah, you can literally see where the mipmaps are kicking in. So you can have your sharper textures even in a bit of the distance, and then have your anisotropy handling the further ones. So if you could calculate that right, you could get some really sharp textures. And I guess even sort of emulate what 32 times anisotropy may look like. But yeah, generally you just get too much pixel shimmering. Moving forward with auto rotate and adjusting this in real time, and oh god, absolute trip. Okay, that is enough of that. Really, really cool to have these settings because it can help you grasp how texture filtering works and what the different settings do in real time without having to go to a menu and keep changing it. So it can help you get a intuition and grasp of what texture filtering does, how it works. So let's quit out of that. So the graph testing is really fascinating. This is where it will show the frame rate, frame duration, polygon count, vertex count, state change count, and as well as the batch count as well. So it's a really cool thing. We're going to run it for Return to Procyon. Don't think there's much point in running on any of the others. I just want to get the sort of results out. You could really go to the nth degree on this and start changing all sorts of settings and getting all the different graphs out and comparing them, but it would end up being like a 10-hour long video. But it's fascinating though that they've included this. So the one thing interesting to note is that it's got the frame rate and the frame duration, which I think should give us an idea of frame times, which is interesting because I don't think frame timing was much of a thing back then. That was when you had stuff like micro stutter and they didn't really know why it was happening with SLI systems. You know, you'd have like 60 frames a second, but there was something would feel wrong with the frame rate, and it was because of micro stutter. You'd have a total 60 frames a second, but some of those frames were taking longer than others and shorter than others, which means you'd get stuttering. So this should, in theory, give us that, which is really fascinating to see way back in 2005. So let's run that graph test now. Let's go in, crank everything up, and force full precision. And let's see what it spits out at the other side. Okay, so you can select what graph type you get. Let's do frame duration. So again, there's not a lot special to see here, so we're just going to kind of skip through it, but we're going to generally keep an eye on the frame rate. Really drops at some points. It goes from like 200 to right down to 100. I think when there's more geometry on the screen, it's probably a limitation of DirectX 9. There's also some weird stuff with the shadowing there, I've just noticed as well in the background. Could just be a limitation of the shadow tech at the time, or it could be some sort of hardware incompatibility causing something weird with the shadows. Let's see what the frame duration chart looks like. Oh, okay. Couldn't start Excel. I was hoping that it had some sort of built-in thing that it would do. But yeah, it says here, draws an MS Excel graph of the recorded data. So I don't have Excel installed, and I don't really want to install. Oh yeah, it says right there. Whoops. Okay, so I completely missed that. So yeah, MS Excel must be installed to run the test and draw the graph. So unfortunately, we can't run that. So yeah, graph mode will essentially spit out some really cool stuff here. Polygon counts, frame duration, stuff like that. But we can't actually check it out ourselves. But it's not a completely wasted test because I did notice some of the oddities with the shadows in the background. That's a shame. I'd really love to have seen that. So yeah, not a completely wasted test, as we got to see some weird differences with the shadowing. Finally, before I run through the demo, let's have a quick look at the results. Again, this is where you could export results out to, again, Excel, get some details on previously run results, and also submit them to the online system that was introduced. This time as well, the system appears to read the graphics and CPU and operating system successfully, so it's actually showing what I'm running here. Let's have a look at the image quality. There's so many permutations of this could take forever. So what I've got it down to is a number of tests I've got here that I will go through and grab screenshots of, and then we'll have a look through them. It's going to be full versus partial precision with Pixel Shader 3 and Vertex Shader 3 through all 3 of the tests. And then it's going to be full precision versus partial precision with Pixel Shader 2 in all of the tests. And then it's going to be Pixel Shader 2 versus 3 in all of the tests. And then we're going to look at specifically the Canyon Flight test with all the different vertex and pixel shaders. So we're going to go through Vertex Shader 2, 2A and 3, and then Pixel Shader 2, 2A, 2B and 3. So I'm going to go through those now, gather those screenshots up, fire up some NVIDIA iCat to do some image comparisons. So here we are in iCat with partial Shader Model 3 Procyon on the left and full precision Shader Model 3 Procyon on the right. So I've had a little bit of a preliminary look through this, and there isn't much of a discernible difference between the two. So I imagine this element of the test is not really where full precision shaders come into play. Some lighting up here. Nope, not really much of a difference. Zoom right into some shadowing back here. Again, not really much of a difference. So if we flick over to partial versus full Firefly Forest, now this is where I would expect to see a difference between the two. Nope, not really seeing much difference there. There must just be very limited shaders where full versus partial makes a difference. So let's go over to the Canyon run. So we've got partial on the left and full precision on the right. Yep, pretty much zero difference. So yeah, it looks like the very few areas where full versus partial precision make any difference are very, very minimal. I imagine it's like 1 or 2 textures or effects, possibly around the more dynamic particle effects, and maybe you need to see those in motion to really see the difference. But yeah, I don't think there's much difference between partial and full. Just for completion, I did get Shader Model 2 with partial and full, so we can check those out now. So here we have partial Shader Model 2 on the left and full Shader Model 2 on the right. Yeah, essentially the same story, pretty much no difference. And then over to Firefly again, basically no difference. And over to the Canyon, yeah, essentially zero visible difference. So it's becoming a very similar story to what we were seeing between Pixel Shader 1 and 2 in 3DMark2003, where there's just not that much difference between the two. I'm guessing it's just because not many things actually will use full precision, which is actually mentioned in the white paper. So now what I want to do is Pixel and Vertex Shader 2 versus 3. So let's start off with the Procyon test, and we're going to be looking at full precision on both. So on the left there's Pixel Shader 2, and on the right there's Pixel Shader 3. Again, just not much difference between the two. I don't really understand what these pixel shaders are doing at this point. I'm guessing they're just more efficient and using the more advanced programmable shaders to just get more performance. Oh, here we go. There's a difference, finally. So it looks like there's a bit better lighting on that texture with Pixel Shader 3. So I'd have expected to see just a lot more changes. It just seems they're very minimal. Just looks like some slightly more precise lighting and shadowing with Pixel Shader 3. Other than that, a little bit of difference up here maybe. Let's zoom into that. Oh no, not really. Okay, so let's check out the Firefly Forest. So 2 on the left and 3 on the right. This is where I'd expect to see something look a bit different, especially the lighting and the shadowing in the foliage. But again, not really much of a difference. Maybe they just wanted to get as much visual parity between the pixel shaders as possible. It's mostly about performance. Yeah, basically no difference there. Okay, let's go to the Canyon run. So 2 on the left, 3 on the right. A quick sweep over. Not really much difference at all. This is a bit disappointing, really. It doesn't really seem like just like in 3D Mark 2003, that they're using much of an actual visual difference between Pixel Shader 2 and 3, which is very strange. You'd expect they'd be pushing it. But like I say, maybe they just wanted visual parity, and it's more about the performance. What we can do now, though, is move on to a bit more of a detailed test with the ship, and we can look at all of the different pixel shaders. So let's look at Pixel Shader 2 on the ship on the left, and then 2A on the right. Basically no difference, which is pretty much what I expect at this point. I imagine it's more of a performance thing, go from 2 to 2A, and then if we go from 2A to 2B, and this is Vertex and Pixel Shaders at version 2. I believe the Pixel Shader at 2B, and there's only one option for 2 on the Vertex shader. So again, I would expect to see some sort of pixel shading differences here, but nope, not a lot. And if we go from 2B to 3, again, basically no difference. And if we go all the way from 2 to 3 again, basically no discernible difference, which is interesting. So I'm going to do a little bit of research right now to see what could be potentially causing that. Maybe it's a modern hardware thing where the hardware won't physically go below Pixel Shader 3 or something. Let's have a look. So I think just from reading from this website here, which also links to the white paper, basically the differences are memory usage, instruction sets, and speed of PS3 versus PS2. There's not that much visual difference, like was mentioned in the white paper here. So yeah, shader model 2. The shader model 2 was just extended shaders, more complex shaders, more operations to choose from, floating point values, and yeah, 3D Mark 2005 just uses shader model 2 extensively, but it can also use 3.0. It just adds the ability to have more program control on the shaders, like for loops in C code, and it can still be handled in the code as an SM2 profile. When enabled, all shaders are compiled to 3 for supporting hardware. So essentially, shader model 3 is just, yeah, programmatical things, performance enhancements. It's not really to do with increasing fidelity. So it's more of a non-functional kind of thing, I guess, implemented here. And I'm guessing when we go to 3D Mark 2006, if they allow that difference to be used between 2 and 3 again, we should see more of a difference, hopefully. I think Procyon returns again in 3D Mark 2006, as well as Canyon Flight, I think. So they may advance things a lot there when we hit shader model 4, or maybe they'll be fully utilizing shader model 3 in the same way that 3D Mark 2005 fully utilizes shader model 2 more than 3D Mark 2003 did. So maybe when I do 3D Mark 2006, if they have Procyon again, I'll do a comparison between Procyon 05 and Procyon 06, or maybe even 03 to 05 at some point. So yeah, flicking between the shaders doesn't really make too much of a difference. I imagine it would make a difference on performance, but even that would be probably pretty minimal. The final remaining thing to do is to run the demo with me doing commentary over it. Alrighty, so we're going to be running with the same settings that we ran everything else on. Sounds, full sampling AA, full anisotropy. Okay, let's do it. So again, this is another one of those demos where I have quite a lot of nostalgia for it. This is one of the more difficult ones to run towards the end of my old PC's life cycle, which was a Duron 1.3 gigahertz with an FX 5500 and probably 128 megabytes of RAM. And then obviously I could run it a lot better with a 7900 GT that I got in 2006. And then over time it got easier and easier to run as I got to an 8600 GT, a 9800 GT, a GTX 570, 760, 980, 1080, 2080, 3090, and of course now the 4090, at which point it now runs flawlessly. And not only does it run incredibly fast, but it's doing it with 8 times multi-sampling, anti-aliasing, which was pretty much unthinkable back in the day. I think most of the benchmarks defaulted without AA. So it shows just how far things have come. Like I said, I'm really interested to see in 3D Mark 2006 what they do with physics. Or it might have been Vantage, which I think was 2007, where they introduced PhysX maybe. Because PhysX still exists as part of the NVIDIA drivers and on the hardware running the shaders, so it should still be able to run it, and it'll be interesting to see what they do with that. Because that is where they went crazy with physics. as they offloaded the computation from the CPU to a dedicated piece of hardware by a company called Asia, which then Nvidia purchased and integrated the technology into their own hardware. But for now, it should all be software-based particle effects and physics. And it's still very impressive. So I think I prefer this demo to 2003's and 2001's. Just because it introduced so much more mind-blowing technology. Obviously this was post-Doom 3, and probably around the time of Fear. So again, it was all about the shadows, the lighting, and it looks like we're heading into the era of guys in huge armor as we were gearing up towards Gears of War. And here's a little extra bit that we don't get in the actual performance tests. Reminds me a little bit of the woman walking along in 3DMark 2000. Again, still the goofy animations. So the graphics are massively enhanced, but the animations are still a bit, you know, early 2000s style. Lots of LOD pop in as well. And here we go with Firefly. So this one I really like. It's a bit more ambient, a bit more abstract. Brings it back to a bit more of that 3DMark 2000 feel. Yeah, just getting us ready for that era of Oblivion to Crisis. It's kind of this area where we probably started to reach a glimpse of the plateau that graphics entered for a while. Because graphics continued to improve, but there was, at which point, once graphics become photorealistic and we have monitors that can render 3D imagery completely realistically like a window into another world, I don't know what happens with benchmarking or hardware at that point. Like I said, this is that glimpse point of that plateau of the late 2000s, 2010s. Because this still looks pretty good. I mean, we are running at a very high resolution for what it would have run at the time, but still. The only thing is there's a little bit of weird checkering in the sky there. And here we are on the canyon run. I thought there was something wrong with my recordings at first because it was so blown out and bright in the background, but then I realized it's just how this was rendered, because this is the time where Bloom and HDR were brand new things and everyone wanted to crank them up to the absolute max. So you had Far Cry, the 1.4 patch I believe that introduced HDR, Oblivion, stuff like that. The use of Bloom was quite extreme, which gives all games and benchmarks from this era a very distinguishable look. At least I think this uses HDR. Let's have a quick look at the white paper. It could just be it uses Bloom with a SDR pipeline. Just flicking through the printed out white paper here. Very satisfying to have it printed out in physical form. God, this still does look good. The water looks really great. The funny thing about the water is that it's got reflection and refraction shaders and stuff like that, but generally it looks very similar to the sort of water effects that are in Halo a number of years prior on the original Xbox. Halo showing just how damn good it was at using those early shaders. Now this is where they also have a whole new rendering engine. So cool. It's using the monster from 3DMark 2003 that jumps out of an asteroid, but now it jumps out of the water, which is quite funny. Just trying to find out if they do use HDR. It could just be that this is Bloom without HDR pipeline, which would explain why you've got loads and loads of blown out scenes in the background. Because with limited lighting range, you have to put the bloom point somewhere. It means you can very easily hit that point, and it results in lots and lots of excessive bloom. Like here. And the ending here, 3DMark 2001 style guitar ending. A little bit of ambience at the beginning there, a little bit of abstract nature, but still not quite to the level of 3DMark 2000. Yeah, I can't say anything about HDR rendering in the white paper, so I think it is just using SDR. So essentially you'd probably have, what, 0 to 1.0 lighting range, and then you'd put the bloom point at, like, kicking in at 0.7 or something, which really limits you to how much brightness you can have before bloom kicks in. So you've got a lot of bloom on the rocks, and the reflection in the water there as well, and in the background it's just very blurry and bloomed out. So it's showing the limits of SDR, if that's the case. But at the same time, the mid-2000s were full of sort of blurry, low precision bloom and HDR, so it fits. I do like this song, it's quite nice. The creatures flying around in the background. This is probably the best demo since 2000. 2001, I wasn't too much of a fan of. 2003 was good, but I think this is probably second to 2000 for me so far. And this is of course where you see the number of companies dwindled down at this point. There we go. AMD, ATI, Intel, Microsoft, Nvidia, Creative, 3D Labs, Dell, Gateway, Imagination Technologies. There's still quite a few on there. Down to some websites, Beyond 3D, CNET, Extreme Tech. Yeah, look at the shortened company list. I mean, the actual hardware companies on there were vastly shortened for what they were originally. S3 Graphics still on there though in 2005. It's going to be interesting to, when we get to the latest 3DMark, to see what the hardware partners are in that. I imagine it's going to be AMD, Intel, Nvidia, and that's it. Some names I recognise there. I think Hilbert runs Guru 3D. This is when I was really getting into the days of forums and hardware and a bit more money, so I could buy a few more things and get more involved with it. Getting very geared up and excited for Unreal Engine 3 and Oblivion. Long before, you know, the new sort of channels that are huge now on YouTube, and it's very much more mainstream. Back then it was much more, still a bit more niche, where you'd have to go to Guru 3D, Beyond 3D, CNET, and envynews.net, which was a very, very, very old website that no longer exists, but was a fantastic resource for beta drivers, some funny stories on people's graphics cards, and generally just a great place to hang out. So this actually came out in 2004, you can see by the copyright there, so they were going a year ahead at this point. So yeah, I imagine it is SDR pipeline that they're running in, and it's going to be very exciting to see 3DMark 2006, which of course I imagine came out in 2005. There we go, a bit of ambient at the end there. Oh, that's really cool. Someone needs to do a 10-hour ambience of this. That's really cool. There we have it. That is 3DMark 2005. Oh, what a time. As usual, let me know in the comments. What do you think of 3DMark 2005? Were you around at the time with the hardware that was available? Do you think it's better or worse than the other 3DMarks that I've looked at? Leave a like, subscribe for future content on tech projects and video games and more benchmarks. We are working our way through the 3DMarks at the moment, and next week, of course, as mentioned, will be 3DMark 2006. Then it'll be Vantage, then probably Shattered Horizon, then 11, and then we'll probably be looking at the latest 3DMark. And also at some point, I need to look at Aquamark, as well as a few other NVIDIA demos that I've dug up. We're going for a real retro graphics ride at the moment. Hope everyone's staying safe, and I will see you in the next video.